and get this. Oh, I gotta do this. Here we go.
Get ready to free your minds, advance freedom, and better all of society with the Annoying Peasants.
And now for something completely different.
Humans do have an amazing capacity for believing what they choose. I think before we go around killing people, we had better make damn sure of our evidence.
They lied to you.
Oh, we just got cut off because we got Brad. Hey, Brad.
Yes.
I got to figure out how to add you. We're right in the middle of the intro. This is perfect.
Well, just tell him you can't handle the truth.
I can't handle the truth. That's how it went. Oh, crap. Let me get back to the Skype thingy here.
You can't handle Skype.
Yeah, there you go.
Covers. Oh, add people right here. We're going to do. Does that work? Oh, crap. That ain't working. Nate, do I have you? Nope. Nate, you still there? Whoop.
We are so professional.
Oh, my goodness. It's on hold. I can't get him off of hold. How's that working? Brad, you just cut in line.
Hello?
Hey, all right.
There's Nate.
I'm trying to figure out how to add you right in the middle of the intro because Brad called in. Crap, I don't know. I have you both on separate lines, you know?
Okay.
Holy crap. How come it says add people, but conversations, add people, but I can't do it? Let me see. Let's try it. All right, we're going to try this. See if this works. Okay, do I have you both now?
I'm here.
Brad, do I have you? Apparently not. Oh, he hung up. I think.
Noise.
Or somehow he got discombobulated.
Well, it looks like I saw him there.
Yeah.
It came up on the Skype thing here.
Okay. I don't know if there's a way I can call him back. With a two-party deal, you know?
Yeah.
And now he's showing he's not here. Crap.
Well, we may just have to make do.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll wait. He'll call us back. I'm sure he will because he's probably figuring he's going to be on a show tonight, and he's actually not at the moment. So he'll probably do something about that.
Well, you're sounding really loud to me. Is there something I need to do? Okay.
How's that? I was just turning it up for me a little bit. But
Okay. Yeah, I think that's all right.
all right. It doesn't affect what anybody else is hearing. It's just this. Okay, wait. This has been another wacky beginning to the Annoying Peasant Radio show.
A little bit of technical difficulties here.
Yeah, it's just I don't know. Since I don't add people very frequently, I'm not very good at how to add somebody when I'm already in a call. I thought I knew how to do it, and I think we've lost Brad, obviously. It shows that he's still on here, but...
Oh, it does?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it does. Yeah.
But I don't see anything, so I don't know what happened.
Well, be patient with us. If anyone is listening and on the chat on Spreaker, feedback is good on what you can hear and what things sound like.
Yes.
As we are adjusting.
Okay, I'm busy texting. Sorry. I'm supposed to be doing a show.
I can hear everyone well, but sometimes, things don't work the way we hope. So if you have any feedback, feel free to chat with us on the Spreaker page.
And I have the chat room open. So anyway, let me...
Yes, and I can see it.
All right. So let me... Nate, do you have access to the chat room?
On Spreaker?
Yeah.
I'm sure I can go there. Hold on.
I would think you could go there and turn the volume down so you won't get, reverb.
Okay.
Anyway, let me know. Anyway, welcome everybody to this episode of the Annoying Peasant Radio Show. I know for about 5 minutes people are going, what the heck is this? And I have here, my name is Brad, but actually my name is Tom. And I'm joined by Tanya and Nate tonight, and maybe Brad in a little bit. So thanks for joining us. And by the way, this episode tonight is entitled The Parent Trap.
I like the title.
The Parent Trap. Wait, wasn't there a movie, something like that, The Parent Trap?
Yeah,
or
there were a
something?
couple of movies. There
Oh.
was a movie, and then there was a reboot.
Oh, so you're telling me this is copyright infringement?
Yeah, probably. Somebody will sue you.
We're getting into intellectual property territory. Come on,
Uh-oh.
let's let's
That's
stay on
because that's a
task.
completely different show. Now.
All right,
Don't
sorry.
get off on a tangent.
Sorry, I lost
It's
myself.
my topic, but it's Tom's title. So I had several different working titles and wasn't sure, and he came up with something completely new. So
So, hey, while we're off the track, as I get
yeah,
to
way
so
off.
quickly, tagline for the show. Should it be like long-form alternative talk? You guys have to chew on that for a while. Think of something, because I got a new round of T-shirts coming up, and I
All
want
right.
to put something good on there. At
what
least for-
colors did you choose?
haven't got that far yet. I have a designer.
Ooh.
Ooh, yeah, that's what I was looking for. A little
Guaranteed
woo.
it's not me.
Anyway, all right, let me get back on track with a brief look at the big picture on this show. I want to use a couple of lines from a Larkin Rose article that I sent to Tanya, I don't know,
really
a couple
good
weeks ago.
article. I know which one you're talking about.
Yeah, and so I'm just borrowing lines kind of little at ad hoc, I guess. He says, "You cannot begin to imagine in how many ways the world is the opposite of what you have been taught to believe." Right? So, and I'm going to go off Larkin Rose for a second. And it's something I've said many times. I support that the natural state of man is to be free. In other words, you are intended to be free, and that freedom predates the state's existence. Well, and I would argue it actually has to, because once the state's established, you're no longer free. The state holds, in fact, no legitimate authority over you. The only legitimate authority over you that could possibly exist is the authority you explicitly grant to another. Voting or no other ritual legitimizes authority over you other than, again, your explicit consent. And back to the same Larkin Rose article, he says, you demand that people, this is a little relevant to this topic tonight, so that's why I threw this in. You demand that people who engage in behaviors you don't approve of be dragged off and locked up, but feel no guilt for the countless lives your whims have destroyed. I think he was actually talking about like the drug more specifically there, but I think it does have some relevance to tonight's show, so we'll get to that. So let's just think about that as we go forward with the ensuing discussion. And here's the deal. We're basically going to ask a lot of questions. We're going to ask you to think about answers. How's that?
Ooh, we're going to ask you to think.
Yeah, that was like what'd I do? I volleyed the ball in the other court, in everybody else's court. So, help us out here. Think
right.
a little bit.
It's Tuesday. I'm done thinking for the week.
Wow.
It's too late in the week, huh?
That was
Darn
a
it.
short week. Hey, I have another technical question. Is this how I turn you down in my head?
Yes.
Okay. Let me see if I'm better now.
Yeah. That doesn't
Okay.
affect our output. That's just your
Okay,
headset.
so I'm not messing anything up. All right.
No.
I just want to make sure
No.
that Tom's not echoing in my head here while I'm...
Okay, so on this episode, on the specific episode tonight, we're going to discuss parenting, and that's why we have Northwood's mom with us, because she's kind of an expert at it.
Oh, no.
She's either done or in process of raising 8 children herself. So
Yes.
Holy.
Holy what?
But
Yes, I am, which means what's that quote that before I was married, I had 6 theories about raising children. Now I have 6 children and no theories. Well, now I have 8 children and no theories. So
tonight we're going to get in, talk to a bunch of other topics that are related to this, like Good Samaritans, the police, authority, and stuff like that. One of the big questions that we're going to ask tonight is, what is the role of law legitimate, we mean by that, in parenting? Where is the line for abuse? Because obviously there should be some line there. And when is it that it is appropriate for another to step into a family matter with the intent to protect a child or someone else? What are the risks associated with doing that? And Tanya has a lot to say on this, so we're just going to get started. And I'm just going to ask you to listen to the discussion and try to gain the context of it. And I'm also trying to text Brad. He's asking me if I should call. Sure. So sorry with that. Okay, here we go. Anyway, I was going to have Brad do the announcements, but I'll do the announcements. AgoraFest 2015 at the Villa Maria Conference Center and Retreat. That's September 24th to the 27th. And I think Nick is scheduled to be with us either next week for a few minutes or the following. So he'll be here because I think he's just in the process of getting the lineup all formulated. So he didn't want to come on before he kind of has that, at least in rough form, set up. Another one, my series that I've been posting is Justice, What's the Right Thing to Do? That's with Michael Sandel from Harvard Business School. The last one, is episode 8, What's a Fair Start? I think, again, I've said this before, Michael Sandel asks a lot of great questions. I don't necessarily agree with his answer, and the only reason, who cares if I agree or disagree with him? The point is, I think a lot of what he has to say isn't consistent with liberty. So that's where we are. So, all right, I'm breaking away again. I hope I have Brad. Do I have you and Nate together, Brad?
We do.
And I still have Nate, right?
I'm still here.
Sweet. All righty. I'm zipping through the announcements at the moment. And let me get through that so we can get going with our discussion with Tanya. Our next live show will be on. So watch that Justice series. I put it on the Facebook page. All the links there. I'm posted to episode 8, but I believe there's 12 episodes, and there's 2 lectures per episode. So there's roughly 24 episodes, if my math's right, and if that's what they actually do in the next few episodes. Because obviously I haven't seen them, so I don't know for sure that there's 2 lectures. Our next live show will be next Tuesday, May 5th at 7 again, and the planned topic is property rights in organs. And the Texas father of 7, Tim, will be joining us for the show, so we'll look forward to another great topic and ensuing discussion with Tim. He's already sent me an outline. He's Mr. Organized. He's on top of this.
I know, he's so organized.
Yeah.
I feel like a loser.
He's got his ducks in a row.
Yes, it was very, very good. He's very...
and
on top of things.
Here's my little
cool topic too. I like that.
Here's my little tease. Organ selling. Look to Iran for a model.
I saw something about that, but I haven't read it yet. I saw Tim had posted that.
That's a sad state of affairs. Iran is way ahead of the United States in a free market for organs.
I guess we will find out.
You heard it here first.
Come back next week.
Okay, here we go. Normally we kind of have a quote of the day, or I don't know, something goofy.
We do.
But today we have a question of the day that I think I pulled out. Is it statism is slavery or something? I can't remember where I pulled this from. But since it was a last minute measure, here you go. How many statists does it take to change a light bulb?
I don't know.
Don't everybody buzz in at once.
17.
17. How about you, Brad? He's not there.
Where's Brad?
12.
Oh, he's there.
None.
Brad?
They use candles. Ha ha. All right, isn't that hilarious? Okay.
Takes you a second.
What I have here tonight is to now hand this show completely over to Tanya, and I'll be leaving. So good night, everybody. No, I just have listed here a number of the links that Tanya provided for me on here. So I'm actually going to turn it over, and you tell us what we're going to do, what order, why, and all that good stuff. So.
Okay, I'll kind of...
Welcome to the Tanya Show.
Would you stop that? You got that out. I don't like pressure, so, Tom likes to make it as stressful as possible.
Yes.
But, no, I started out, I think, with this topic, and as soon as I mentioned this topic, you sent me an article about the Mitivs, or the family that has been in the news lately, and that was kind of the story that sort of sparked this. There's been kind of a debate going on lately, and I follow a lot of this stuff, so I've heard a lot of stories, but that one really kind of seemed to be a little more of a mainstream story that people were aware of. This Danielle and Alexander Mitiv and their children, I think it's Rafi and Devorah, a boy and a girl, 10 and 6 years old, in Silver Springs, Maryland. Apparently, that's a wealthy suburb of D.C.
All our money's around D.C., so all of them are wealthy.
Well, so yeah, this family, if you haven't heard this story, this has happened a couple of times, but they've been in trouble with, with social workers,
CPS,
with CPS, and
Child Protective Services.
They had this happen more than once. The most recent story was kind of the big deal. I know something happened back in February. They consider themselves to be, I'm air quoting, free-range parents, or part of what I keep hearing is the free-range movement, although the free range parenting movement, although I would argue that it used to just be called parenting. These days, what they're doing is called free range parenting, but their children were allowed to walk. Actually, they'd been picked up, I think both times that they had been picked up by police or whatever. They were walking like a mile away in their suburb to a nearby park or playground or something.
Oh,
but
cool.
anyway, they had a problem in February where their home had been, where they had been investigated by CPS, and then now recently here a few weeks ago, their kids got picked up again and held for like 6 hours by police with basically they were not allowed to call or eat or use the bathroom or anything during this time. So, and all of this was in the name of keeping their kids safe. So that's been kind of a big story.
Nate, you had something.
Yeah.
Real quick, Tanya, maybe I missed this, so I apologize, but where did you say they live, or what city is this in?
Silver Springs, Maryland.
Silver Springs, Maryland. Okay.
Near Washington, D.C.
Okay. Do you know anything about that location? Is it because I mean, obviously we know what's going on in Baltimore, Maryland, right now.
Yeah.
They're a little busy right there.
Yeah.
Well, I just read that it's a wealthy suburb of Washington, D.C. So, that's all I really
Okay.
know about the area that they live in. That I think it had been voted like the most caring suburb or something to that effect. It did have a reputation for safety and, some of these things. But somebody called CPS, and they had back in February, they had 6 officers and like 5 police cars at their house. They demanded their ID. They entered without a warrant, forced them to sign a safety plan under threat of taking the children right on the spot. And then further after that came back another time with police, insisted they didn't need a warrant. They had interviewed their kids at school without their permission. There were all kinds of things going on. And that was the first instance. And then I know it's been a few weeks ago, I'm not sure the date, when someone called again and their kids were picked up and held for apparently 6 hours. They were supposed to be home by 6 p.m. They didn't show, and the police did not deliver them home till after 10 p.m. With no phone call. They were not allowed to contact their parents.
That's a nightmare.
Yeah, crazy story. And that one's kind of there's been a lot about that in the news. So that's what kind of, I guess, sparked this topic, because I'm aware of a lot of other stories like this. Not that this is a real common thing that's going on, but it is, the atmosphere is changing, and it just got me thinking and just sparked conversations about how the world has changed from, I'm in my 40s, how the world has changed from when I was a kid, at least. I don't know, Tom, was it a different experience for you?
We're riding our bikes everywhere and anywhere. That was our only mode of transportation, man.
I know, we were all over the place.
Absolutely, and I mean, I'll just say this. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've rode my bike off jumps, not wearing a helmet. Doing all the things that these days, parents like you're saying here, they'd probably be thrown in jail for. But like my mom, I'm sure these days would have been arrested if she was raising me in these days.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because that's actually an interesting little subtopic or part of this whole discussion. Is what is a kid now missing out on because he / she is sitting, I don't know, in front of a computer playing a video game, or constantly being supervised, whether they're on, I don't know, the soccer field and there's coaches and there's parents staying there, versus when we were kids and, okay, we were doing a lot of stuff we probably shouldn't have been doing, whether they were against what our parents wanted us to do or they were just risky behavior. But what does a kid miss out on is my question. Do that, Nate. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the short answer, in my opinion, is they're missing out on a lot of fun. But that's part of the thing to me about being a kid is as a parent you got to find that balance, and that balance of allowing your kids to be kids and go out there and take risks, because heck, you learn so much from taking risks and from failing. That's a big part of being a kid is those times when you decide, yeah, I'm going to climb this tree, and then you figure out that, okay, maybe I should maybe I should be a little more careful when I'm doing that because I just broke my arm.
Yeah, I think the danger there is if you don't learn to do those things when you're, I don't know, jumping up and down off a curb or something somewhat harmless. Mm-hmm. Are you going to experiment with that later when you're, I don't know, 18 and your buddy shows up with a bag of drugs?
Oh, absolutely.
I
mean, I'll say this. I grew up out in Afton, Minnesota. The house that we lived in was like up in the middle of the woods. And I can't tell you how many homemade fireworks we made. And I can't tell you how many lives I probably went through. I'm probably on my last one right now.
Hey, hopefully your folks aren't listening to this because you're going to get in trouble, man.
You're in big trouble, Nate.
I'm so grounded.
You are dead to us now, Nate.
I think you made a really good point, Nate, about, parents needing to be able to make decisions and help kids make decisions about how much risk to take. That's I think kind of the big thing about this topic is that we're seeing, it's not that this is happening, it's not real common, but it's becoming more common, but it's the idea that these decisions are being taken out of the hands of parents and expected to be made by the state or made by random observers who judge what is and isn't an appropriate risk for your child to take.
Wait, don't you listen to Melissa Harris Perry? What is she on? MSNBC or CNBC? I don't know what
no,
station.
I do not listen to Melissa Harris.
Children belong to all of us, she says.
Oh, yeah.
And therefore, what did she say? Something like it takes a village kind of stuff and all that crap. And therefore, basically she says we own them.
Yeah.
Well, that gets so twisted because I would say that in some ways I agree with the whole it takes a village idea, but we've got to talk about what is the village. The village is not the state. The village is not the use of force or a threat over you. The village is a community, and that is some of what we've lost in the state coming in and intervening, and so many things in our lives that have changed. I want to talk more about all of those reasons why that's changed, but we the problem we have is we don't have a village.
Yeah,
to help raise the children.
we have a village, but it's not a voluntary one.
Yeah,
right.
And I'm not blaming the state for this in totality because certainly there's a huge chunk of society that wants to hand this over to the state. And I don't have a problem with someone wanting to hand this over to the state. I really don't. I'm just saying you can hand it over for yourself, but don't hand it over for me too. Right? Hey, if you want not to have authority over your kids and want to have, I don't know, the cops or whoever it is do it, that's up to you. But the whole point is the way the system works, in air quote, because I think it doesn't work. Yeah. But is that, if you get a big enough chunk of society that says, yeah, we got to hand them over to the kids, mine get handed over too, even if I'm against it? That's where I start to have problems.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if I start there. I maybe start a lot earlier than that, but that's problem. But this is interesting. Getting back to Maryland, the law, according to this article, I didn't do the research. I didn't consult an attorney in Maryland. But the quote in the story is, state law in Maryland says a child under the age of 8 years old cannot be left alone in a building, enclosure, or motor vehicle, and they must be with a reliable person who is at least 13.
It says under the age of 8? Is that what it says?
Under the age of 8. That's according to this article is the quote. Now, the kids in this case, again, were, I believe, 10 and 6. Mm-hmm. So it goes on to say there is nothing on the books about a child being accompanied by an adult or someone 13 or older if they're outside. Right? It says a child cannot be left alone in a building, enclosure, or motor vehicle. So this was part of the legal wrangling that was going on with this. It's like, hey, we didn't violate the law. The kids are outside because they got picked up walking. I can't remember. Were they walking from the mall or school or something, Tanya?
No, they were walking between their home and a park, like a mile away from their home.
A mile away? We used to ride our bikes for like 15 miles away.
I know.
I used to ride my bike that far just to get to school. I mean.
Well, and the funny thing is in their suburb, from what I saw, that they don't even offer bus service to anyone who lives within a mile of the school. So, that's odd.
Yeah. So what
are they expecting then? that so kids can't walk to school. I mean, that used to be a really common thing.
Which leaves you, well, then I guess the parent has to drive them to school if they're less than a mile, right? Because if they're more than a mile, they'd get bused. I don't know how that works.
Yeah.
Well, and that's one thing that we talked about, and we'll talk about more. The real risks, the greatest risk of all statistically, is to strap your child in a car and drive them somewhere.
I wanted to get in there, yeah, because this is an important point. I think about this whole story. Okay, so our experiences are, hey, I used to ride my bike far away. I used to walk far away. I used to walk more than that to school, whatever, right? And then people, I can hear the detractors saying, but it's a much more dangerous world today. You don't understand. It's not 1970 or 1980 or whatever. This is the 2000, teens, they call it. I don't know what the heck it is, right? I don't know what year it is, right? And I know Tanya, I think, had some statistics. Do you have something nearby?
Well, yeah, you had sent me an article. That's the real kicker to this story. I think probably the most important thing that we can talk about is that, because we hear that all the time, it's a different world. It's a much more dangerous world that we live in today. Things are different. There's much more risks. But statistically, that is not even close to the truth. So I think it's always good to find out the truth, don't you?
Yes.
So, yes, you sent me an article. I had seen some of these statistics other places, but this was put together really well. It was called "It's Never Been a Safer Time to Be a Kid in America." Can't remember who wrote that article. Somewhere. We'll post it on the Facebook page. Where'd that come from?
Most likely some kind of agitator out there.
Yeah. Well, okay. And I'll just kind of throw it out there. They said overall child mortality rates are the lowest ever. There's been a drop in child homicides. The chances of premature death for children ages 5 to 14 is like the lowest ever. As far as missing persons that are minors, those numbers are at record lows. It's down like 40% since 1997, but they said that's not even a big enough number because the population has been increasing during that time. So it's 40% in numbers, but with an increasing population, it's an even greater percentage of drop, and as far as like missing persons, this whole stranger abduction fear, they say that 96% of missing persons are runaways, and of the rest of them, it's only, I think your chance of being abducted by a stranger is like, what they say, 1 in 10,000 or some crazy, I
think it's even more than that.
Yeah, it's gotta be.
Yeah.
And I believe you're more likely to be abducted not by a stranger, but by...
if you are a missing person, you have a 1 in 10,000 chance of having actually been kidnapped by a stranger and not someone that you know.
Exactly.
If you already are of the people that are missing.
Right. So
that's,
And it's more
likely...
likely...
Is it more likely to be struck by lightning, win the lottery? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's...
And a lot of this, and I guess I kind of have to ask, and I don't know if you have the figures or the stats, right there at hand, because I know, and just kind of playing devil's advocate, I know that the response by opponents or people who disagree with you is going to be, well, how far back do your statistics go? Because it's one thing to compare, now and like 20 years ago or 30 years ago, or what are we actually comparing here?
Right.
Well, these were, I'd have to look back at the article again. I just jotted down some quick things because I know the mortality rate, they tracked it back to like 1935, I think, or, those kind of things. So you have differences in health, differences in diseases and things like that. They attributed a lot of this to vaccines in this article. Now, we've been there on this show, and that's another whole argument in and of itself, whether that's actually accurate or not. But they said, no, it's not just that, that it's the child homicides, all types of premature deaths. Like I said, missing persons, minors, is down 40% since 1997. They said traffic-related pedestrian injuries and deaths are way down. They said those are small numbers to begin with, but they're way down. I mean, saying something has gone way down when it was a very small number to begin with, is that significant or not? And they said it's unlikely that it's due to the stricter parenting or due to this helicopter parenting, they said more likely. I didn't read all the research on this. I can post that article and it has links to that stuff. But they're talking, auto safety standards, pedestrian infrastructure, overall violent crime is down for all groups of people. There were just a lot of statistics that, it's just overall a safer world.
Something that Tanya and I talked about just prior to the show, and maybe not quite in this context, but I do think the statistics are helpful. Again, I'm not saying they're the absolute truth. I don't know how the statistics were collected. I don't know who collected them. I don't know what their motivations were. I don't know how they were compensated. All those things that could possibly affect how the statistics are created and then how they're crunched afterwards to come to these conclusions. Again, all those.
True.
But again, I'm not saying they're not useful. I'm just saying when you gain these statistics, you can't not inject your own thinking and your judgment on them, right? Mm-hmm. But where I'm getting to here is we talked about before. This really, to me, is ultimately parenting and all this stuff is a judgment call, because if you leave your kid, as one of these stories was, left the kid in the car. This wasn't the Mitevs, right? Or the Mitevs.
No, that's another story.
Another
I
one,
want to
right?
talk about. Yeah, that was a.
So, and I'm just using it quickly as an example. I'll let you do that story. But, okay, so you leave your kid in the car. You basically get busted by the cops for doing that. You run in the store, 7-Eleven, to grab a pack of cigarettes and alcohol, which is what I usually do.
Yeah, because that's what parents are always doing if they leave their kids in the car.
Right? You get busted.
Negligent parents, right?
And people say, well, excuse me, that was very risky behavior, or you unnecessarily put your child at risk, blah, blah, however you want to characterize it. But here's the point. Your alternative is not a no-risk situation versus in someone else's judgment or Child Protective Services or the cops' judgment, very risky or too risky, whatever that threshold exactly is, because there is no risk environment. You're always facing risk. Now, the question is, you got to make a judgment. Is this acceptable risk for me and my child, or is it not, right? And you conduct your behavior differently. So the point is, people think they don't really consider the alternative risks. They just think, yeah, that's a bad idea to leave your kid. And I don't know if any parent is saying, you know what, I think this is a freaking brilliant idea to leave my kid alone. It's just that you face bad alternatives at the time, and you may be frustrated, you may be hurried. There may be all kinds of other factors that I couldn't even foresee that go through a parent's mind, which makes them go, okay, this is a decent risk. I'm just going to go for 2 minutes and I'll be right back. So again, what I'm saying is a parent faces a continuum problem. It's like, what risks are acceptable? What risks are unacceptable?
You're always making those calculated risks. I mean, I have a toddler. How often, if he goes in the next room and I homeschool, so my kids are all home together all day. If he goes in the next room with his siblings, how often do I need to step out of the kitchen and check on him? I could just stand there and hover over him. I could put him in a backpack and strap him on my back. I could put him in a playpen and not let him move at all and keep him right next to me. I could let him sit with his siblings. There are all day long things you have to decide, so how long will I wait before I go see if he's okay, getting in any trouble? Do I yell to the next room and say, hey, is he all right? These are all the things in every moment of the day you're making those decisions based on calculated risk.
So go ahead, Nate. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I have a real quick kind of funny little aside story here, because you're mentioning about, having a toddler in the other room there, and, how often do you check on him, things like that. It reminded me of, and just to give you a little background, I'm divorced. I have a daughter who will be 12 in about 21 days, I think. And when she was about about 3 years old, I was, one day I was like, I'm going to go take a shower. She's watching her cartoons. She's just kind of chilling out there. I'm going to go take a shower here and everything, because I really need to.
The shower decision.
Yeah, yep. So I went and I took the shower. I got out. I cleaned up. I walked out of the bathroom, clothes on and everything. I walk into the living room. She somehow figured out how to change the channel and she's got it on the Silence of the Lambs.
Whoa.
Oh, no.
And she's crawled up on the couch, and she's taken the cord from the Venetian blinds. And I don't know what possessed her to do this, but she decided to wrap it around her neck.
Oh,
Holy
no.
cow.
And I just immediately, I'm the worst father
freak-
ever.
oh,
Oh
and
my gosh.
So many times these things happen, and you can step away for 10 seconds. And when it does happen, you're like, you're just, it was just the worst decision that you ever made. Why did I ever take a shower? But realistically, do you never shower again? I found a neighbor's child wandering around in the road one time as I was driving on the back roads near where we used to live, about 2 years old. I didn't know the people. I found this little girl wandering down the road, and I stopped, of course, and I kind of, looked around, and there were just a couple of houses there, and I thought she must have come from this house. It looks like someone's home. Walked up to the door, knock, knock, knock. No one answers the door. I stood there, and I thought, well, I don't know if I'm at the wrong house. Should I go? It has to be this one. And finally, after about a minute or so, I hear some rustling inside, and someone comes to the door. This mom had been in the shower, and her daughter had opened the door and walked out of the house and walked down the road. And so, I was just standing there right at that moment of thinking, I'm just going to have to take her home with me. But now I'm going to take someone else's child home with me. Am I going to get in trouble for taking this kid? So we were nowhere really around any other people. So, just stuff like that happens. And it's really it's not normal, but it kind of happens to all of us sooner or later if you have any number of kids.
It's so easy to second guess after the fact, right? When you took the shower and your daughter got herself into trouble, right?
Yeah.
I could tell, well, Nate, you shouldn't have taken a shower, right? Or this mother who was taking a shower and her 2-year-old wandered off. I could say, well, you shouldn't have gone in the shower, then the kid wouldn't have wandered off. But I could tell you that after the fact, right? How many times would you do that and absolutely nothing would happen? You'd walk out and your daughter's still watching the same cartoon. It's like, oh, it's nothing, right?
Absolutely.
And that's the whole point. Obviously, there's some risk associated with that. There's some risk associated with the alternatives, right? But you made the decision, and here's my question in this. When does the state or some other service, or call me a good Samaritan, I'm walking by your house, I look through your window, well, since my name's Tom, I'm a peeping Tom, and I see you with your bath towel on, which I'm guessing, hey, I think he's going to the shower, and his daughter is sitting there. That's just wrong. I'm going to break into the house, and I'm going to protect the child, right? When is it legitimate? When is it not, right, to do such things? Okay, maybe that's a bit of an absurd example. I'm good at absurdity, though. But that's my point. If there were no state, and I'm a horrible parent, when is it appropriate for someone to step in, and what are the risks that are facing them?
Well, yeah, and I think all those questions are valid, but it's kind of like you said. At what point? Because really, kind of when we talk about being anti-state, we're talking about we're against the initiation of force against otherwise peaceful individuals. But what do you do when the person in danger, that being the child, who's not capable of defending themselves or protecting themselves? So at what point is it somehow justified to step in and do something?
Right, and that's, I think, part of the trouble that people have with just no police force, no city police, no police as people know it today, that, theoretically can apply justice evenly, uniformly throughout the land, right? Because their objection would be, wait a minute, if I have my own private police, you have your private with all standards. If we can't do that, that isn't going to work. So
what are we going to do about the parent down the street that we see, they're on their own property, and this is just a hypothetical, but what do you do when that person, you see them, possibly abusing their child or, beating the heck out of them, is it justified at that point to intervene? Is that infringing upon their natural rights,
Okay, Northwood's mom, tell
Well,
us. Enlighten us.
Well, here's one of the things. Luke and I were having this discussion on the way here. We were talking about it, and I have this article here, and I'll try to kind of get. We're touching on little bits of it here and there, but it's from the Bloomberg View. It's called 7 Reasons We Hate Free Range Parenting. I actually threw that one up on the Facebook page with the show announcement there, and she gives 7 reasons. But one of those, when we're talking about actually intervening, and when we use the term Good Samaritan, I don't like when people use that term, because when you really look at what's the story of the Good Samaritan is the example that we use here. The Good Samaritan was someone who actually stopped to help someone who was injured, who had been passed by lots of other people, and physically helped him and paid for his care. This is someone who intervened to really help in a tangible way. Recording something on your cell phone and tattling to the state is not being a good Samaritan. We've got to stop saying that. That's something different. So, and I think that question of when you intervene is interesting because, and in this day and age of cell phones, it's especially bad because we've taken away any cost to you of intervening. Without the state, if you intervened and you were wrong, there would be recourse against you, and that's what we don't have. We have zero cost. I have someone that I know recently. Obviously, I'm not going to mention any names to protect their privacy. They're a different town. They don't live here at all, but someone I'm aware of.
We'll call him Brad.
Yeah, let's call him Brad. But no, this person opened a home daycare and had someone call CPS and say that she had abused their child or something like that, and some kind of allegations, and then they got investigated. Well, it didn't come to anything, and they didn't actually ultimately get charged with any wrongdoing, anything like that. But they live in a small community, and just had to shut down the daycare because the damage to their reputation. And they said that this person who had called was known to call about various other people for different reasons, just for different things, accusing people of crimes and things like that. And there's no recourse. There's really very little way to stop someone who just likes to lie about people. It happens all the time. And then when the state says, they're going to err on the side of protecting the child, that all sounds really wonderful. But what that means is there's not going to need to be any real substantiation of any of these
allegations,
things that people are saying. So so really there's just no cost. I mean, if you're assessing, kind of risk benefit analysis, it's just hey, it doesn't cost me anything to, take a picture and tattle.
Yeah.
And I'm anonymous and nobody ever knows I did it.
I think go ahead.
I'm sorry. I apologize, Tanya. I haven't read all these articles or anything, so I have to admit I'm a little I'm a newbie to the whole idea of free range parenting, quote unquote.
Like I said, it used to just be called parenting. It's apparently now it's a movement.
Yeah. The article 7 Reasons We Hate Free Range Parenting. Megan McArdle, is she actually making an argument against it, or
no? And the title sounded a little odd. She's kind of saying we as a society, 7 reasons we hate free range parenting, and I thought that was odd too. I probably should have said that. But no, when you read it, she's just saying the reasons why everyone seems to hate free range parenting so much. And one of the things that was on her list of 7 was mobile phones, and she just made the point that there's zero cost for using your phone. She said, if it would be surprising if we lowered the price of being an officious busybody and didn't get a lot more of it. So used to take a lot more work to call the cops on someone who left their child in their car. It was much more acceptable, so it rarely ever happened. But if you really wanted to call, you just have to work a lot harder at it.
Okay. So I'm kind of surprised. She's typically as someone who is a little more, at least friendly to at least a libertarian mindset, I guess I would say.
Okay.
Well, she is. No, it is to that. And maybe the title sounds odd. She's not saying that she hates it. She's saying, okay, I'll
Why
read
people
it.
do.
Yeah, I was going to go through this, and I'm kind of jumping right into the middle of this. I'm sorry, it related to the next story I had. She says, why has America gone lunatic on the subject of unattended children? Parents hover over their kids as if every step might be their last. If they don't hover, strangers do, calling the police to report any parent who leaves their child to run into the store for a few minutes. What's truly strange is that the parents who are doing this were themselves left to their own devices in cars, allowed to ride their bikes and walk to the store unsupervised, and otherwise given the limited freedom that they are now determined to deny their own kids. The police are making arrests that would have branded their own parents as criminals. To hear people my age talk about the dangers of unsupervised children, you would think that the attrition rate in our generation had been at least 30%. So that's the beginning of the article. And then she gives 7 reasons why she thinks this is happening.
Okay.
So if that clears it up a little bit.
Okay, here I'm going to switch gears and go back to Good Samaritans for a second, because
Okay.
I think that's actually a very important sub-issue here. You know, and first is really what is a Good Samaritan? And I think it's actually very difficult to define. And, of course, this is just Tom's view. This has nothing really to do with liberty, as it were. But I think a Good Samaritan is one who acts out of a genuine desire to help or provide aid.
Yes.
Okay. But the examples that we have, the one, and you'll probably get to this more in a minute, the kid in the car deal, where people video it and they wind up calling the cops or whatever, all the things they do. To me, is that not the kid when you were a little guy and you were doing, or gal, sorry, doing something, and I don't know, your sibling or your friend says, I'm going to tell.
Right.
That, to me, well, and I know they will say, wait, I'm doing something good. I'm actually genuinely helping this kid because I'm reporting this parent from what I believe is abusive behavior or risky behavior, whatever however you want to describe
Well, it's
it.
tattling, but it's tattling with potentially terrible consequences.
And here's the point for me. If they really were, from my definition or how I view Good Samaritans, there is, in fact, risk associated by intervening. There's risk associated by me being the peeping Tom and breaking into your house and watching over your child while you're in the shower. And you show up like, hey, what the heck are you doing in my house, right? And now we have this, there's risk. If I'm wrong, I'm trespassing, then I'm potentially endangering a kid because I'm a weirdo, right? Breaking and entering, all the stuff, right, that has to happen. And I'm saying these Good Samaritans are not, or so-called Good Samaritans are actually not, because they take no risk at rectifying the situation, right? They call somebody else to intervene, not them. If they were so certain that this is horrific behavior, and horrific's not the right adjective, however they describe it, then they would intervene directly and assume that risk and say, hey, I'm willing to assume the risk. Why? Let's go to court and I can make the strongest case for what I did to an impartial third party. But if I'm afraid that I might not be able to do so, I'll call somebody else to do it.
Well, and a person might argue that this is the system we have, so that's what you have to do because you can't just intervene without consequences or whatever. Okay, so that's fine. So you're making a calculated risk there. But I would ask, and this is something, we always want to talk about, Luke and I talk about this a lot, we always talk about kind of what can I do or what are some action items I can take in relation to something. And I was thinking about this, that if you see something like this, if you find yourself in the situation where you see something that you feel doesn't look right to you or some child is at risk, do you or would you, this would kind of determine your mindset, would you stop and look at that situation and think to yourself, what is going to happen if I do this? What is going to happen to these people? And in that moment, I mean, if you were to call just because you saw a child, looks like they're 5 years old, they're sitting outside Walmart in the car, the parent walks into the store and leaves the child there in the car. And you call the cops, you are saying in that moment that you have determined that child would be better off being kidnapped, basically ripped from their family and put into the foster care system. Do you have enough information at that moment to make that decision? And I would argue that, because you have that cell phone in your hand, you're stepping way out of bounds and you may be doing something really terrible and you may be completely putting that child at a much, much greater risk, and much worse things could happen to them as a result of your actions. So you're not a good Samaritan at all.
But this is typical of the relationship that people have with the state. They take no responsibility for any of that because why? I'm actually not the one who took the kids and put them in child protective services and put them ultimately in a foster home or whatever happened. And by the way, the mom then gets a criminal record or whatever happens to her, right? Because all the proceedings and all the costs associated, not just dollar costs, time, headache, and all that other.
Well, sometimes they take the kids, or sometimes they arrest the parents and then put the kids in temporary foster care. Any number of things can happen, but none of them good.
So they disassociate themselves with what I would argue is the use of aggressive force, right? It's easy to do. I didn't actually do it.
See, that's the next topic I want to talk about, because we talk about representative government and we say we are the government and we're represented. But when you do something like that, if you are the government, are you then taking responsibility for what happens to that family as a result of the phone call that you made? Or are you just saying, oh, it's not my fault, it's not my responsibility because the government came and did it for you? Didn't they do it on your behalf? If they didn't do it on your behalf, then is anyone really representing you at all? I want to go further on that topic later. I think that's important.
But I'm saying the answer for me, just for in my own head, is, of course, they're not good Samaritans because they don't take responsibility for that. And if they would be willing to, because the situation is so egregious in their view, they would be willing to assume that risk themselves. And the point is they're not. So they're not good Samaritans by my definition. I can't say.
So what would a
anyone
good
else's.
Samaritan do? If you're at Walmart, you see the kid in the car. It's not a hot day. You don't need to break the window. They're not in peril. You just see and you think maybe there's a risk. What would a true good Samaritan do? Now,
there could be 1,000 answers to this. There might only be one. I don't know. But just for me, if I'm a good Samaritan and I got my cell phone, I video you get out of your car and what appears to walk into Walmart. How long it's going to take you, I don't know. It's a busy place. It's going to take you longer than you think. I'm really a good Samaritan, and now I'm concerned about the welfare of your son who's playing his video game sitting in there. I'd stay by the car with your son.
Yeah, me too.
Right? I'd watch your kid and wait till, I saw that person who went into Walmart come back. Not a different person, right? And I'd say, hey, wait. Before you get in, lady, before you get in this car, could you I saw what I thought was you go in the store, but can you verify that you're his mother before I walk away and let you? I just want to make sure that I'm leaving the kid in the custody of his mother and not some yahoo, right? And then I say, here's my name, here's my phone number. If you got questions, call me later, right? But here in general, though, I would say, again, this is just for me in my head. I have a really long rope for this. Now, you say, well, you could maybe see a kid that you're like, not too sure about. That's true. And maybe something bad could happen. And yes, that would be on my conscience, but it would be something for me to work through. And the reason I have a long rope is I don't know the context of your family dynamic and your relationship with your kids. And, who am I to tell you how you're supposed to parent your kids and how you're supposed to react in that situation? I don't know, if you're frustrated that day or, what's going on in your life. So I can't, if you guys want to be critiques of my life, get in line. This could be a long critique because I'm far from.
Well, it'd be nice if you were the person that was just spying on everyone because you just wouldn't intervene. No, I would, for me, I think personally, I would stay and watch, not because I really thought anything in that situation, I thought anything would happen to the child. I'd be worried about other so-called good Samaritans intervening, and I'd be standing there watching. If I saw somebody, photographing or doing something, I'd be going, oh no, I know him. I'm watching him. His mom just asked me to watch him for a minute while they went into Walmart. Then I'd talk to the parents when they got back. I'd probably just be like, hey, you're lucky it was me, but your kid is fine and probably not a bad decision at all, but you might want to watch out for all these good Samaritans around the parking lot.
How about you, Brad? Any thoughts on where the line is or what you would do, how you might handle a situation?
Well, first of all, there ought to be laws against people like you, Tom.
There ought to be a law.
I was gonna say, Brad's still there.
Yeah, he's with us.
Well, so let's take this to the absurd. So let's say that I'm not a good person, which I'm not.
I was gonna say, what do we? This isn't fiction, Brad.
Yeah, we're not pretending anymore, are we? And let's say that I'm not the most responsible person. Again, we're talking a lot of truth here. So, if I choose to let my kids possibly be harmed in the car, in your world, in the free world, is that not? Am I not entitled to do that? And I'm being totally facetious. But I'm trying to get the opposite side of the spectrum.
Yes, but you wouldn't be able to just do it. You wouldn't be able to report to some authority anonymously with no risk to yourself. You would have to actually confront the person.
I wouldn't have a state to mandate that I can't do that.
I think.
Right.
Wait, did I misunderstand? I thought you were showing that you were the parent, and don't you have the right to let your kid engage in some risky behavior? Is that what I was hearing? Or
okay.
Did I misunderstood?
Yeah, or choose to put my kids in harm's way.
Now, but you would be taking the risk then that someone else would intervene on behalf of the child. You don't get to just do whatever you want. People can take a risk and intervene. And the child themselves then has some rights. And children in a free society would have the right to leave the situation. And they don't now. They're basically prisoners. They either, whatever the state says, whether they have to stay with their families or go into foster care, wherever they have to go, they basically have no say. But children would also have more freedom in a free society. I
think where you're going, Brad, is kind of where I was alluding to is like, again, just Tom only, I only can speak for myself here on this, is I would leave you a long rope. So I might see you with your kid, I don't know, you're swinging the kid in the swing so hard you're trying to loop him around the horizontal bar.
Right.
Right? And I might, wait longer maybe than others would. Again, I don't really know, but I still think this
is a dad versus mom issue, pretty much.
Yeah, that's actually it is. Hey, quit swinging them so hard.
Stop throwing them up so high.
And that's obviously that's what I alluded to before. It's a continuum problem. Is what risks are acceptable, one or not. And I say ultimately it's the parent who has the decision to make. But let me only add one thing. There is a point of abusing another human being by violating their rights.
Right.
Okay. It's one thing, I think, it's a little different to make decisions on behalf of another versus violating their right in property. Arguably, here's like, I don't know, I'm burning cigarettes in you, which would certainly violate your property right, would be my argument. Now, again, you'd have to make that in front of an impartial third party and let them decide if I'm actually making a good case or not. I mean, maybe they might say, no, that's perfectly fine. Again, I think people have the misunderstanding that in the state of society in which we live, these things are ironed out and there's rules that are clear, and that's why we don't have disagreement over this. I would argue the opposite is true.
That's not the case at all.
Yeah, there's more disagreement because of the way the system is set up. And I think people would get more used to intervening if they felt they could defend their actions, right? If you can't...
Right.
I would not take the risk of intervening on something if I couldn't. Now, there's other ways to do it, too. I mean, I might just hey, Father Brad, do you realize how high you're swinging that kid on that thing? I might just ask you, take a moment and think about it. There's only 1,000 better ways to go about it than the way I would do it. I got, foot and mouth disease. But, right, so there's other way of saying, instead of saying, hey, you're swinging that kid too far, it might better work to ask the question of what's the way to do it. We lost somebody. I don't know if we lost Brad or Nate.
Nate had an emergency. He popped us a comment.
And he had to run.
There's a potential leak in the house or something like that.
No.
Attending to. So
okay.
Everything's okay.
Nate.
So there's other ways of doing it. So that's a point. And the whole thing about children and parenting is a very interesting topic in the libertarian world.
It's another whole show or 10 shows.
Yes, it is. And that's the difficulty I think a lot of people have with this topic, even that Tanya's working on tonight.
Yeah, and we've had some interesting discussions. Luke is here tonight, too. My husband is sitting here with us. Probably won't talk as usual, but anyway, we've had discussions sitting around here in the office after the show about kids or about because we talk a lot on this show about self-ownership, and I'm not sure I have this all sorted out. I just, like I said, I have lots of kids and no theories. But Tom, you talked about the idea of kids being partial self-owners, which seemed reasonable to me, having had 8 children and knowing that when you have a newborn, they're not able to take self-ownership at all. You have to make all their decisions for them. And then when they reach 2 years old, you can, it's more, do you like the red t-shirt or the blue t-shirt? Would you like some milk? They're making decisions. They're taking a little bit in more and more and more until, as they get older, but it's not cut and dried. But that seemed reasonable to me to say, yes, they're partial self-owners and they take more and more of their own self-ownership as they grow and mature. And that's something that really only parents or, someone who's really in close contact with that child can assess. The state or random strangers on the street aren't really very capable of making those decisions.
Not only are they not capable, I think they wouldn't in a free society, they certainly wouldn't have the legal authority to do so. It's only been handed over to them by the power of the pen or the ritual they call voting. But I think the difficulty with children is the difficulty that I try to avoid, which is, I think, to my knowledge, limited knowledge, is unavoidable with children, and that is the continuum problem again. I would agree with you. I say essentially at day one, an infant, a newborn, however you describe that kind of person, is essentially capable themselves. And when I say capable, actually, in part, physically capable. I think their brain hasn't developed. They don't have the development there to assume their rights as self-owners. Essentially close to zero as maybe you can get.
Right.
And that percentage, that number grows at some varying rates for different people and varies at different times, right? The rate of changes. At some point, that decision can only be made by the child or the child and parent in conjunction. It's essentially, hey, the number's now 100%. Adios, right?
Right.
I don't think a third party is capable of making that a decision unless so designated by the legal guardian. In other words, saying, hey, I got dementia. I have the onset of dementia. I'm not going to be able to make this decision. I designate you to be able to do it at a later date.
And I'm no expert on this. I only present the qualifications to have this discussion based on the fact that I've now experienced everywhere on that continuum, basically kind of all at the same time. We have one child that has grown and married and moved on to full self-ownership, and we still have a teenager at home and one soon to be a teenager and a bunch of younger ones and still one that is not quite 2 years old. So I kind of watch all these things happening and think about these issues a lot, is where is this person on this continuum of self-ownership?
Yes, the never-ending question. Okay.
Interesting.
Can I back up on one more point?
Okay, do it.
I liked what was said because it made me see things a little differently. That's awesome. About the definition of how our society looks at a quote-unquote good Samaritan.
Yeah.
And that's a dude that picks up his phone and says, hey, 911, there's a guy up on a roof and he might fall off. I don't think that we can judge somebody for that, because I do think that that's how we're all kind of conditioned in this society that we have.
Yes, I would argue
rather than engage ourselves.
Yes, that's another danger of the system in which we live. We choose not to take responsibility for ourselves and our own actions. We're so used to someone else or some other agency being responsible for us. We don't have the inclination to say, hey, I need to assess the risks here of me getting involved versus not getting involved. Right? I'll just do it easy. I won't be involved. I'm just going to dial 911.
I think that ties right into the past show that we did on education, where we talked about the education system, the public education system. Kind of the result of that has been to create fearful people who are not really used to handling things for themselves and taking their self-ownership, and then we project that onto children. Can't remember which article it was. Somewhere I had a quote from someone who said that someone who deals with children on a regular basis, that children basically have adjusted to the fact that they are being watched all the time. They are used to kind of a surveillance society where all of their movements are being tracked, and we're kind of all the way there. And this is really creating anxiety for kids. And so it's a big problem. It affects people's lives when these kind of things happen. I mean, some of these stories of parents that have been arrested or children that have been taken, they talk about the effect it has on their children. And they say they have nightmares and, they're afraid of being taken. But it's the fear of, it's what the state has done that has created the fear. They were not snatched by a stranger. Nothing terrible happened to them other than the fact that they had the cops come and pick them up, sometimes keep them from their parents for long periods of time.
The worst of strangers.
Well, in the Mytivs case, there was a social worker that told their child that there were strangers waiting to snatch him, so he should tell his parents that he didn't want to go outside alone anymore. I mean, a social worker said that to their child. Can you imagine? I mean, is this how we want to raise our children? How are we going to create? That was one thing that this Mrs. Mytiv, there was a quote from her where she says, how are these independent, capable people going to just emerge instantly at some point? They have to be learning, they have to be growing, they have to be taking that responsibility a step at a time, or we won't produce mature people.
No doubt. There is, I think, something lost. And I think it's up to every parent to decide what that is. And at the moment, they're not able to do so freely because they act in part, what part, I don't know, what percentage, but out of fear of what might happen to them by the state, the agency of the state, whether it be Child Protective Services, the police, or some other organization. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's healthy for parents nor children to make those types of decisions under that kind of duress.
Right. I asked myself, most people, if they would never leave their child in the car, let their child walk around the block, or let them do these things, are they more afraid of the stranger or them getting hit by a car or something like that happening? Or are they afraid of someone reporting them, or afraid of the state coming and picking up their kids, or afraid of losing their kids? Especially once you're aware of the facts of the real risk, which is very, very low, that they're in any kind of random danger, anything that the much greater risk is from the state or from the quote unquote Good Samaritan. I find it interesting. I think there's a lot of anxiety for parents these days on all those fronts.
Yeah, I don't believe it's healthy for the parent nor the child, for the parent to be making decisions in part or in total or some portion in between there based on the legal consequences of doing it versus the actual consequences to the child and or / the parent as far as their relationship and how the child's progressing or not progressing.
And it really interferes with you being able to really look at your child and assess your child.
Yes.
Because you have all these fears, and so you're not really making rational decisions when you're making decisions out of fear. Whether it's fear of dangers that don't exist or fear of the state that is going to come take your kids away from you. I mean, all those are scary things.
Yeah, I think that's the trouble. Not the trouble, it's part of the trouble with the system that we have. For me, the main argument is essentially self-ownership, right? And if I am the guardian of my son or daughter, that means I get to make the decisions. And if I make two wacky decisions, it would be clear for someone to step in and assume the risk of stepping in.
Well, I thought it was interesting, just back to this article I was talking about, these 7 reasons, like all this anxiety or worry or people that are calling because they think that kids are at so much risk. Why do we worry so much? Why are we so afraid? And I thought it was just interesting, in this article by Megan McArdle, she was talking about some of these things. And we talked about the cell phone, that it's so easy and that there's no cost, but she talked about also like our information age, where we have so much information coming at us that years ago it used to be if a child would be abducted, these things occasionally happen, very rarely, but you would hear about it, but you didn't hear, like, we have the perception that these things are happening much more than they really are, because they, like, there's these cable, 24-hour news, they have to fill the airwaves with something, and so we hear about everything and we hear it over and over again. So we get that perception. And I just thought it was interesting, all these things that affect our perception. Like, there isn't this great risk. A couple different articles I read talked about how the economic insecurity has made parents just feel that every moment of their child's lives has to be scheduled and planned and sort of be like able to go on their resume so that they can be competitive and they can get into the right schools, because they're worried about their future and worried that they're not going to be successful. They don't know what skills and abilities. A lot of the jobs that used to be, or degrees that used to be a sure thing are going away, and it's very insecure. And so parents are just worried about their kids' future. And so we micromanage their lives and sort of over control, because it feels like free play and free exploration and things like that are just a waste of time.
Yes, they're, I would argue, much undervalued.
Right, I would agree. And this, maybe I'll get in trouble here for being politically correct or whatever, but, it used to be that there were fewer mothers in the workplace. And, it doesn't matter whether it's mothers, fathers, whatever. I mean, but we talked about this on the education show too. It now takes two incomes to produce what one income used to. So most of the time, both parents are in the workforce. There used to be most of the time, or a lot of the time, one parent at home. So in your community, if children were running around the neighborhood, there would be neighbors, people that you knew that would be safe. This one article I read that I'll probably mention later, but talked about, we were like a pack of wolves. We'd run around the neighborhood and parents would feed and water us occasionally. Somebody would throw us a bologna sandwich and
lock
we'd
us
move
out.
on, lock us out again. That would happen, but that's not happening now. And also that our social networks have changed, because when people are spending more and more time at work, just needing to make a living, and so their social networks are at work and don't include their children, so they don't know their neighbors. They're not a part of their local community anymore. They're part of their work community, and their children are locked out of that, so they don't have that freedom within their neighborhood.
Wait, aren't these the same parents who have their kids all in all these regimented things that look at homeschoolers and the first thing they say is, well, what about the ability of your child to socialize?
I know. Don't make me go there. I'll get totally off track.
Right?
No, I know, but our social networks have changed. And partially, it's not necessarily our fault. I mean, it's, we can look at a lot of the way our system works and how it takes, you just got to run faster and faster to make it and pay the parasites. They're part off the top.
No doubt.
But, it becomes more and more difficult, and that really affects our lives socially. So it's part of what has happened. One more thing she says, it's collective action problems is what she calls it. Like, everybody skews in the community. It's kind of like generally accepted accounting principles. You skew to sort of the most risk-averse parent in your social group, because if anything happens, like if something happens to your kid and you weren't following the like kind of accepted rules, then you're a bad parent. But if you're doing everything right, then if something bad happens, well, it's really bad, but at least you're not a bad parent because you were doing everything you could do. So it's kind of that sort of, I guess, peer pressure. Yes,
you risk condemnation, right? If you aren't, supervising to the extent that the most extreme mother in your social group would, you face, if you let your kid do it, he or she gets hurt, that mother's going to be thinking, well, that's your own fault. You should have been watching them. That's what I do. I don't understand why you can't do what I do. But
then if we skew to the most fearful person in the group, then we kind of have a fear-based mentality. And she makes such a good point here. She says, parents in most places shelter their kids from risk by strapping them into cars and driving them to supervised activities, which is more dangerous than almost anything those kids could have gotten up to at home, because riding in a car is the highest risk. If statistically, getting in a car is one of the most dangerous things. I mean, not
For a
saying that you
kid.
just for a kid. That's the greatest risk. So it's ironic.
But wait.
Sadly ironic.
Is this the same article? Because I read so many of them, I can't keep where the information.
I sent you so many.
The gal saying, I know statistically, I understand that flying in an airplane is safer than driving a car or the safest thing to do, whatever the exact description is. But she said, but emotionally, I still feel safer on my way to the airport than when I'm at 38,000 feet with
I know
the
it's
airplane.
not how it feels. You know that you're safer in the plane. Statistically, you're more likely to die in the car, but it doesn't feel that way.
But
So
let me add this to this because I think this is also an important thing. Assume that Tanya is one of the greatest financial advisors in the world, and I have my pitiful portfolio that needs to be managed. In a free society, I would clearly, I think at the moment in this society still, I have the option to do it myself or to hire Tanya or anybody else, right?
right.
But there is something to saying, hey, I might think, hey, I believe Tanya could actually get me a greater return on my investment than I can. But I just want to do it myself because I want to have that accomplishment or failure unto myself. Right? I just want to do it myself, which is a little like saying, which I think is totally fine. I mean, I know people condemn other people. Well, you should have had it professionally managed and then you wouldn't be in this situation.
Right.
Well, again, it's the deal of, okay, but I still feel safer or I want to drive because I'm in control of the car myself. In a free society, there's nothing wrong with that. There's really no condemnation other than social pressure condemnation that's potential there.
Well, it's kind of like homeschooling. It's that social pressure. Like if anything goes wrong with your kid, I think that we talked a lot about the public school system. There's no guarantee that in the public school system that your kid's going to turn out okay. And in fact, there's probably a guarantee they're going to be quite indoctrinated and there are going to be some bad effects, but people kind of feel like that's the safe choice. And, anytime anything goes wrong with homeschoolers, then suddenly that's because, you didn't follow the norm. You homeschooled your kids. You didn't put them in school. So if something bad happens or your kid turns out bad or whatever, it's because you didn't follow the generally accepted practice.
Yes, there's risk associated there. There's essentially no risk as a parent putting them through the public system like everyone else, right? And just say, well, I followed, what everybody else did. So whatever, if it's a bad consequence, is really not on me. I did my job.
It was the system. It was the teacher. It was, whatever, because this is what everybody does. And so I just did the normal thing.
Right.
It's not my fault I got a bad result.
Exactly.
So that's part of it. Oh, by the way, Tim is in the chat. So
oh, hi,
hello
Tim.
to him. He's there. No, in this article here, we talked about the mobile phones. It talked about lawsuits. Said, we kind of have a very litigious society, so people worry a lot about risks because, you're able to. People get sued a lot in this society, so we worry a lot about just kind of removing every risk from playgrounds and parks or whatever. And then the last thing she said was that we're richer. We can afford more safety, which can be good and bad. Sometimes when we can just afford the ultimate in safety and we can do these things, really like everything you can do, you shouldn't necessarily just do because you can. But that's what we tend to do. If we can afford it, then we'll do it. And it tends to stunt the creativity and self-reliance that we want to develop in children because we wrap them in bubble wrap and don't let them make mistakes. So, that was something else. So I thought that was a good article. I'm real interested in exploring the reasons why we've lost our collective minds about certain things.
So let me widen this whole thing out. You spoke about safety and security of our children.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really the same or parallel issue that we have in foreign policy. One of the many objections to engaging in a free society versus a statist society is, well, there's going to be no single entity that provides for the common defense, our safety and security. And I feel very afraid about the ISIS guys or the communists in China. I don't know. I'm afraid of everybody. So how will I be handled? It's the same safety and security issue. I think that people don't really consider fully in their own mind and say, hey, there's risk associated with the system we have now. There's risk associated with a different non-system, all right, the status system. And I think they, in large part, fully discount the risks that are created by the state in the foreign policy arena and wars and these things. Right. That they create this. So what I'm saying is this issue is not necessarily completely unique to children, because in a lot of cases, I think a lot of adults never grow up.
No, we do a lot of things that make us feel safer or support things that make us feel safer, but actually do nothing of the sort. They don't keep us safe. And yeah, I mean, that's very true. You know, foreign policy seems a world away from
this issue.
Should you let your kids walk to the park by themselves? But it's huge. Certain things, you know, that feels really unsafe. It feels like they're really exposed and that's really dangerous. But actually the greater risk would be if you put them in the car and drove them there. And same thing with like you feel safer if you're driving in the car, or you feel safer, you know, than getting in the airplane, but you're actually safer in the airplane. And it does. It expands. It's interesting to expand it all the way to foreign policy. But those are the things where it's like the security blanket that really isn't a security blanket at all.
Yes, and again, that would be my single comment here on the foreign policy issue in the war. I would argue that the state actually makes the world less safe, less secure. And that's, again, 10 other shows to do that, to make that case more fully.
So I would say save your emotions and those feelings and everything for your kids, and look at the cold, hard facts and the truth and reason when you're looking at risks and things. You'll say, I love my kids, so I'm going to assess real risks, you know, and really look at what's really likely to happen and what's not. So that would be something that you could do out of love for your kids and out of those kinds of emotions, because we all have feelings and emotions. And you know, I mean, sometimes you got to step outside and say, you know, this feels a certain way, but maybe I should be looking at it a different way. Maybe if I get used to looking at it a different way, it'll start to feel different. Sometimes our feelings follow that. It was true for me as far as how we feel about, you know, maybe the state or security, things like that. I changed my mind, and now my feelings are way different than they used to be.
You know, I would say make that assessment that Tanya asks you to make about your kids and your security and all these things. I would say use the basis of self-ownership was a big chunk of this show. Everything we say here is built in that. So when you assess these things, don't just think, well, I think my kid should be an astrophysicist, so I'm going to do this. Do it. Well, wait a minute. I support self-ownership. Mm-hmm. If I'm a self-owner and my kid is a partial self-owner, how do I navigate through these decisions? And I think a lot of people don't do that. They just go, well, I want to be more safe rather than less safe. And I think the state does. I mean, that's everything I hear on there. These guys are fighting for my safety and my security and my freedom all the time. So I guess that's a good thing. And I'm saying stop and think about that a little bit. What are these guys doing? I'm just going to here's a commercial message.
Okay.
I saw the movie The Water Diviner.
I haven't even heard of
Russell
that movie.
Crowe. First time
I
he's
like Russell
directing himself.
I'm so out of the loop. I never know anything. So
and you know, cool. My brother says it's a sign of the rapture coming because I actually went to a movie because I generally don't do that.
I love movies,
but I'm not going to say a whole lot more in case somebody's really interested in seeing that movie. And I would encourage you to see that movie. And there's a little bit about the whole foreign policy thing, going to war, the justification for it, blah, blah, all that stuff. And that's the part, of course, I liked more than anything of the movie. But, of course, you know, I'm not the best evaluator of an acting job, but I think Russell Crowe did a fine job. But obviously everyone else and the critics got to do that assessment.
Russell Crowe can do no wrong since Gladiator. So
The Water Diviner. So, anyway.
Cool. I want to see that now.
Okay. What else do we have to get to, Tanya?
Well, I have this other story, and you said you read that. This is long, so we won't go through all this, but it's this story is called The Day I Left My Son in the Car. It's by Kim Brooks. This is from June of 2014. This was on Salon.com that I found this story. It says, I made a split-second decision to run into the store. I had no idea it would consume the next years of my life. And you know, she tells this story where she was running late. They were getting ready to go on a trip. She had a 1 and 4 year old, and she needed to run to the store. Her 1-year-old daughter had gone down for a nap. She realized her son's headphones, the ones he was going to need to watch the movie on the plane, which was going to keep him quiet and from disturbing the other passengers and everything, had broken. So she went to run to the store, and her son says, me too. He wanted to go to the store. So she takes him to the store and figures out that really he was just trying to score some technology time in the minivan because the iPad was there, I guess. It was her mom's car or whatever. And so he insisted he doesn't want to go in when she gets there. And so it was one of those split-second decisions. I'm only going to be in there a minute. I got one thing to pick up. Do I risk the meltdown from this tired, cranky kid? I'm in a hurry. I got to get back. I got to get packed. This whole thing. So in that moment, she decided to leave her son in the car. She runs into the store. She's gone about 5 minutes, comes back. As she drives away, she hears someone, she thinks she hears something, someone saying, "Bye now," when she drives away, which is just, it makes my skin crawl. Anyway, so I guess she was visiting her parents, I guess, so they were flying back home. And when she gets home, her husband says, "Call your mom." I guess then there was a police car in the driveway when she arrived home from driving them to the airport. And so this whole story goes on and on where they have to go to court. And so she writes this whole story about this experience that they had. They hired a lawyer, and lawyer told me he had a productive conversation with the officer involved, that he'd explained I was a loving and responsible mother who'd had a lapse in judgment, that it seemed quite possible charges would not be pressed. And for a while, it looked like he was right. I guess 9 months later, dropping her kids off at school, her cell phone rings, and she finds out there's a warrant out for her arrest. So, I should have kind of written down all the details of this story. So I don't know, she ends up having to go to court and ends up getting community service. And in the end, it wasn't, she didn't lose her son, but in the course of this, it was just this really scary experience. And she says they charged her with contributing to the delinquency of a minor ultimately. And she asked her lawyer, she says, why would this be? He says that the state had tried to pass an ordinance that would make it a misdemeanor to leave a child under 6 alone in a vehicle. So it would just be a ticket, it would just be a fine. They couldn't get it passed. So here's one of these things where we say, okay, this is all really cut and dried. Well, it's not. They said it left her in this legal gray area where kind of like where they could just find a crime to charge you with, or they could just pick something and try to convict you of, this contributing to the delinquency of a minor would be rendering a minor in need of services. So he says, if you've left him and not come back, someone from social services would have needed to come, bring him in, make sure he was safe and such. She says, but I did come back. I came back after a few minutes. He says, a gray area. So all of this was this so-called Good Samaritan doing this. And she says, well, maybe I should just plead not guilty, because she says, I didn't do that. I didn't render him in need of services. And her lawyer said, you don't want to lose your kids. I mean, the risk is you can lose your kids. So parents are forced into pleading guilty to these crimes that they didn't commit, decisions that they made. I said, just assessing the risk. And so this mom ended up with community service, but she ended up writing about this. Other parents reached out to her as a result of it and told their stories about going through similar things. And there's story after story. I don't know really what I don't have statistics on how often this happens. It doesn't happen often. I mean, maybe 100 times you could do this and nothing would happen, but it's what happens when somebody tattles on you, I guess, is the thing. Yeah, so I don't know. What did you think of this story? This horrified me as a mom. I have a hard time even reading these stories.
Again, I may have my stories crisscrossed, but I think isn't this the mother who winds up meeting the other mother, which is really poor description, the one who let her kid run, 9-year-old, I think, ride the subway in New York alone?
Yes. Someone suggested that she should reach out to Lenore Skenazy. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. She has a blog. I'm not sure if that one's called Free Range Kids. They call her the founder of the Free Range Kids movement. She let her 9-year-old son take the subway by himself resulting in a flood of outrage and admiration.
Yes.
So that was kind of a big story. And she says she founded this movement dedicated to fighting the belief that our kids are in constant danger.
But again, I think that the constant danger part is important. That she's the one who, at least from reading this as I recollect, she pointed out that, hey, there's risk associated with everything you do.
Yeah.
And only, again, I think only the child and parent, and maybe mostly the parent, depending on how young the child is can actually make that proper assessment. We can do. It's so easy to be the the Monday morning quarterback, and after your kid gets ripped off out of the car, say you shouldn't have done that, right? But where was I beforehand? I didn't have any vast amounts of knowledge before it happened, right? I may have seen a kid in the car at the grocery store, and I chose not to intervene, which means I made essentially the same assessment that the parent did.
Right. That's a good point.
Right. I mean, it happens, and
every time you've said that several times during this show, and every time I think of the thing about leaving your kid in the car versus like taking them into the store, and I think of how many close calls we've had with shopping carts, kids that you turn around and they got out of the strap and they're standing up in the cart. Kids get injured all the time, and I think, how much safer are they statistically waiting in the car than they are if you stick them in that shopping cart? You can think of so many things that actually have happened to you or actually have been really close calls, and all the things that really never seem to happen.
The assessment seems to be made that, okay, that the Child Protective Services or the cops, whoever, say, hey, you put your child at risk unnecessarily. But that's not necessarily the case. What about if it's a winter day that you're walking with, you can't leave your child in a car, so you take him in. The child could slip and fall and conk his coconut because of ice.
Well, what is this based on? That's the thing. How much risk? If you have to prove that the child was at greater risk than some other thing they could have been doing, but that's not what it's based on. It's just a random thing. Because like I said, we would make it illegal to put kids in cars if we were just talking about statistic risk. Right.
It's just a legislative burden that's placed on you.
Right.
Just said, hey, if you leave your kid in a car, whatever the rule of Maryland was in the enclosed space or whatever they say, they just wrote that in there.
Right.
They
and
just made that illegal.
Why do the state laws usually say, like, okay, in an enclosure, like a car or a building, it's this rule, but then it's a different rule if you're outside. So if you step outside the house or step outside the car, then there's a different law that applies to you. That doesn't even make sense.
Because it's completely arbitrary.
Right.
Right? That's the point. And my point being, there's risk. People seem to make this assessment assuming essentially there's no risk associated with the other actions that a mother may have taken or may not have taken. In other words, you put your kid at greater risk. Well, how can I say that? I don't know what the risks are associated with doing what other thing you could have done with your kid. So I think it's completely arbitrary doing this, and I would argue a lot of these people are not, in fact, good Samaritans. They're busybodies that are doing, I'm going to tell, because they can indirectly exert some authority over you. They want to, and they are able to do it in this system. Again, in a free society, they wouldn't be able to do that because no such agencies would exist.
Luke says they have too much time on their hands. Pretty much.
Life is pretty good then if you got
maybe
lots
it makes
of time.
them feel like they did something or accomplished something or whatever. Yeah, I guess so. It makes you feel good, but it's not necessarily doing something good. It's like I said, I like to say, what's the definition of a real good Samaritan? And you got to actually do something, not just tattle.
I think someone who's attempting to do something out of genuine concern for the welfare of whose ever behalf they're intervening on.
There was another story I read, I'm not even sure which one it was, where they talked about it's kind of a new thing to take video of people's kids melting down, like in grocery stores, shopping areas, things like that, and like put it on YouTube. Like that's just entertainment to watch, I guess, supposed bad parenting or whatever. And they talked about, the alternative would be to put down your cell phone and offer to help. If you see a mother with 3 young children trying to unload her grocery cart and she's got a triple meltdown going on, how could you truly be a good Samaritan in that situation? Do you want to mock her, make fun of her, or think she's a bad parent? I ended up making a friend one time because I saw another young mom in the grocery store, and she had a 2-year-old that was just having a full-on meltdown. And I just walked over to her and I said hello, and I was like, yeah, one of those days. We ended up having lunch together. We made friends, so instead of kind of running away, or I think everyone tries to like kind of pretend it's not happening, or they don't want to talk about it, or, they're either ridiculing you or they're ignoring you. But to actually say, how can I help? Or even just say, oh, I get it. I understand how frustrating that is, or just anything at all would be a better option.
Well, the notion of bad parenting is a little troublesome to me. I view parenting as more or less as coaching. Right? You get to coach, you get to advise, you get to consult, but you don't get to play the game. The kid is the one who plays.
Right.
And my point being is, you could be the best coach and your players just screw up. That's on them, right? Now, there is such a thing as bad coaching, bad parenting too. I'm not saying there isn't, but I'm saying the parent doesn't get sole responsibility for everything the kid does. I think it is possible to be a good parent and just have as poor as this is, a bad outcome, right? It's possible. I don't know how frequently it happens. That's way beyond my pay grade.
Well, gosh, nobody knows the answers to those questions. It's the endless debate.
Right.
Nature, nurture.
But I think it's pretty easy for me to see you in a 4-second snapshot of your 18 years of raising your kids and saying, you're a bad parent. Mm-hmm. Right? And I think people don't hesitate. Again, the busybodies don't hesitate to make that assessment on 4 seconds out of 18 years.
Well, something, I hadn't even added this to the story. This person that I met years ago, like I said, in the grocery store with this child having a meltdown, actually, as I was talking to her, even it was not very long. I was like, wow, I don't know you very well, but she even shared with me that she had an older child that had been killed in an accident that was very close to the anniversary of his death. She was obviously very stressed, and, it was just like a difficult time. It was like, wow, you in that situation, you find out this person is dealing with huge issues in their life, and things like that. It's like the fact that their 2-year-old's having a meltdown in the grocery store is probably the least of their worries. And maybe, I just thought that was interesting. It was something that really made me think that, yeah, I mean, you could walk away and you could just judge someone and go, oh, well, that kid's a brat. Why doesn't that parent just discipline that child? You have no idea what this person is dealing with personally.
Exactly.
So that was a good example of that, I guess.
Okay. You have something to add to this?
There was a good quote by Lenore Skenazy, this, kind of founder of the free range kids movement. I marked this. She says, there's been this huge cultural shift. We now live in a society where most people believe a child cannot be out of your sight for 1 second, where people think children need constant, total adult supervision. This shift is not rooted in fact. It's not rooted in any true change. It's imaginary. It's rooted in irrational fear.
There you go.
That was where she talked after that quote. She said, irrational fear and I are old friends, because she said she does not feel safe in the airplane versus the car. Yeah.
Driving to the airport, she's safer.
It was that.
All right. So I'm going to push you along.
Right.
We'll call this the last story because we're going to have to wrap up here. But
that was kind of the last, important article,
this next one is more important because it's got more humor in it.
Which one is? Oh, yeah, I did want to. I wanted to talk about that article, kind of in the sort of like action portion, like the.
This is our wrap up.
Yeah. What do we call this? Kind of our action items or whatever. I will switch to the. I went old school and printed out all my articles today. I have a new printer, so instead of opening up all my tabs, I'm shuffling papers.
All right, this one's entitled "What Would My Mom Do?" and the subtitle is "Drink Tab and Lock Us Outside."
This actually came from my friend Sarah on Facebook, which I thought it was just hilarious. But
okay, so you do go with it, and I'm going to interject as I always do.
Okay, well, I don't know. I don't want to read the whole thing. It's kind of funny. She says, I'm about to tell you the truth. Parenting has become very precious in our generation. This very morning, a mom posted on her son's birthday, she assembles a comprehensive time capsule, including items, photos, and products related to that particular year, stores it in a set of antique trunks, and plans to present them all to him on his 18th birthday as a tribute to his entire life. Holy crap. Cannot deal. And she goes on to talk about how, this kind of helicopter parenting and how it just steals our joy because everybody's posting on Pinterest and posting on Facebook, all these parenting successes and all these wonderful things they're doing. And it just makes you constantly feel like you're doing a terrible job at it, all this parenting pressure. So she says, here's my trick for keeping the joy and losing the stress. What would my mom do? I was born in 1974, good readers. It no more occurred to my mom to cuddle us precious snowflakes than it did to quit drinking a case of Tab a day. So she says, if you told my mom to craft a yearly time capsule for each child to store until graduation, she would have cried tears of laughter all the way to jazzercise.
Yep, no kidding.
So, the quote that I wrote down in serious is she says, my mom says that she and her friends just raised us while my friends and me parent. That's air quotes. And she says they didn't worry endlessly, interfere constantly, safeguard needlessly, or overprotect religiously. They just raised us and we turned out fine.
Yes.
Quite different from the way parents
I'll
raise
just
children today.
add to it another quote shortly after this. It says, it never crossed my mom's mind to entertain us or to fund expensive summer endeavors or to create stimulating activities for our brain development. She said, get the hell outside. And we did. Right? And this is, again, alluding to what we talked to. We made up games, rode our
This is my
bikes,
favorite part right here, this part of the paragraph.
and choreographed dance routines and drank out of the hose when we got thirsty. I swear my mom did not know where we actually were half the time. And she goes on and on. But it's just... And
no, this is the best part, though. Turned
Yes.
out in the neighborhood all day, someone's mom would eventually make us bologna sandwiches on white bread and then lock us out, too. We were like a roving pack of wolves, and all the moms took turn feeding and watering over us.
And for me, here's the next line is actually the crescendo, and it's the most important part of parenting. She says, and never one time, not once, did I feel unloved or neglected. And I think that's maybe the single biggest part of parenting.
She says, my parents majored on the majors and minored on the minors.
There you go.
That's good. Then she posts a lot of pictures of her kids doing dangerous things. I like the tree skateboarding. They're
Yes,
up in the tree getting ready to jump on a skateboard.
Yes,
Wow.
that's a little crazy.
I like her quote here. A good parent prepares the child for the path, not the path for the child. We can still demonstrate gentle and attached parenting without raising children who melt on a warm day.
Right.
I like where she says pull back as the cruise director. I tell my kids that a lot. They say, I'm bored. And I say, well, I'm not a cruise director.
Yes, and it makes sense.
I don't have all these activities planned. You're going to have to, if you're bored, find something that you like to do.
Right. And I think that's a big thing that people miss now. They don't know how to entertain themselves. They know how to be entertained.
Well, there's always the classic mom response of, well, if you're bored, I can find lots of things for you to do.
Yes. So anyway, do we cover that, Tanya? Is there any last thing that you want to add? What did I not bring out on the show?
Oh, I don't know. I wanted to make sure we talked about kind of like the what to do. And we did talk about, I like that we talked about that Good Samaritan thing a lot, to really think about it. Do not ever, play the so-called Good Samaritan with your cell phone without really thinking about what could be the results of your action, because you may not actually be protecting that child. You may be seriously hurting people. So, and just know the facts. Also, don't give in to fear, I think, of the state either. I mean, you can be afraid of all these risks to your kids. You can also be afraid of losing your kids. I mean, all of these things are risks that are really, really rare. And for the most part, I mean, we've been, I don't know, there's a lot of kids, I think, with our homeschooled kids, like all the other kids are in school all day. We've kind of always lived out in the country. We've never really lived in a neighborhood where other kids are around. So our kids haven't had as many opportunities as we would have liked to run with the pack. I lived in the country as a kid, and I ran around my grandparents' neighborhood and my mom's friends' neighborhood. We would go visit people, and our moms would sit inside and drink Tab and kick us out, Yep. We'd run around the neighborhood. So stuff like that. But our kids haven't gotten to do as much of that. But we've been talking about kind of letting them take longer bike rides down our road, or our 9-year-old daughter just made a friend down the road, and like her friend's allowed to go so far up the road, but she's allowed to go all the way there so she can go get her friend and walk her back. So they're running around a little bit more. And so we're just kind of trying to help our kids make those kind of decisions. But they don't have as many opportunities. There just there aren't as many other kids around as there used to be. So it's a different world that way.
No doubt it is. No doubt it is.
So I guess those are kind of kind of the important things I guess I wanted to bring out. Anything else that...
Anything that Brad wants to add to
about?
the close of the show? What
Yeah,
did we
hey,
miss?
Brad.
What did we forget? What should we emphasize?
I guess I'm sitting here pondering all of this, listening to you guys. It's very interesting. I just wonder if we're not repeating a generation over and over about how it was when we were kids. Hasn't every generation kind of done that?
I think to some extent that certainly is the case, but I do think, again, I'm biased because I was a kid in the 60s and 70s, and I'm now an adult. Well, I'm an older person. I don't know if I'm an adult. But, and I think technology has maybe made a bigger impact in this last generations than it has before. And I think that might be the big difference. Hey, you can babysit your kid with a TV. You can babysit him with a computer game. You can babysit him with stuff that simply did not exist, of a generation 2, 3, 4 back.
Well, and I really see your point, Brad, and I don't like that either. So hopefully that's not what it sounded like, because I don't really like to be like, I hear all the time, oh, my parents did that and we all turned out fine, and sometimes...
I'm not saying that that's what the only thing I got from the show.
Yeah, well, I think about that because, I'm not
is-
nostalgic for the things that happened, like the things that we used to do that actually were dangerous. Like, one thing I think that has been a really good development is auto safety. Now, we could do a whole show on all the intervention by the state and what's bad or whatever, but like car seats. We always say, oh, we never had to have seatbelts, or we never had to be strapped in car seats or whatever. Well, regardless of how you feel about the state being involved in that, when you really look at the facts and statistics, we know that children are much, much less likely to be injured when they're in child restraints and all this kind of. So that's one example where, I just don't like when people just kind of across the board just say, oh, well, I did all this dangerous stuff and I turned out fine. I think in general, though, it's just that things that really aren't all that risky, they're reasonable risks. We should be allowing our kids to take much more reasonable risks, I guess, would be the point I would want to make.
And the parents and with the child are the ones who determine what reasonable is, in my view.
Right. If somebody else can't really decide, I might put more restrictions on one of my children than another because I know which ones might be a little more level-headed or not, or a little more coordinated or whatever it might be. But, really, we're the only ones as the parents that can know that. Our oldest daughter was always quite mature and ahead of her years, and she was helping with younger siblings when she was quite young, and she was always real tiny too. So people thought she was younger than she was. People would make assumptions about her being younger than she was, when not only was she older than they thought she was more mature than they thought. And we actually knew what she could handle and what she couldn't. And I've handled things differently with my younger kids because they're growing up different people.
So your point, Brad, do we miss it? Do we?
Nope. I very largely agree with what you said. I just was sitting here, it's hard not to sound that way. But I think that the point I was trying to make is it's what you guys just did. It's more than just that.
Okay. All right. So let me wrap up then.
It might not actually be a good idea to drink out of the hose. Maybe not.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know.
It's perfectly fine. Please tell your friends, as we always say, heck, even tell your enemies about the show. We always like more listeners, that's for sure. The next episode is going to be property rights in Oregon's with the Texas father of 7. That would be Tim. So he's already given me a bunch of information, so you better check out that show. I'm sure he's got a whole lot of fantastic stuff there, and I think it's a great topic. Besides, we hope we provoked you to think and make any comments that you have on our Facebook page. Of course, facebook.com/AnnoyingPeasantRadio. And thanks for listening, and we look forward to our next discussion. Anything I missed? Is that it? Am I out? Am I playing the goodbye music?
Yep,
Thanks to Nate. Thanks, Tanya.
All right, thanks everybody.
Guys.
Here we go. Mac DeMarco, goodbye weekend. Adios, everybody.